Okay, we in our regular series are in the middle of Hilchos Siman Pei Aleph. We're between Halacha Vav and Halacha Zayin, and it's a hashkacha. We're right, exactly the right spot to talk about Pesach Shiloh. So we're going to switch into our Pesach mode. Usually a little before Pesach we do Pesach things. Switch into that to do some Pesach Shiloh about drinking milk from cows that ate chametz. A related Shiloh is eggs from chickens that ate chametz. We're going to mainly focus on the cows, but most of what we say has to do with the chickens also. Okay, so just to help put things in perspective a little bit, I'll mention, Rabbi Leonard told me yesterday, or the day before, that the original CRC guidelines for making kosher Pesach milk include instructions to the farmers to not feed their cows
soaked feed.
Okay, that was in the original instructions. Not that anybody
how much for Pesach?
Followed that. It didn't make difference. No one followed up on it, and no one paid attention to it. But it was in the original instructions. And I read a report that in Eretz Yisrael, not only do they not feed the cows chametz, but they make sure that the cows don't even have bedding that's made out of chametz. Okay, they're extra careful. They're afraid of grains getting into the milk. That's a little different. The grains getting into the milk. But okay, kacha. Okay, so what's the question? So,
in udder.
Udder. If the animal's dirty, then he might get some udder.
Fall off of the udder.
Okay, so the Shiloh is this. The Ramah that we had learned in Halacha Vav said, we talked about a din of Ksheirish Yankim Not Treifa, a kosher calf that nursed from a mother who was a treifa, and we found milk inside of it. Okay, the Shach over here, the Shach on the place tells you should know, we're talking over here about the milk that you find inside the calf's stomach. That's what the Shiloh is here. But you should know that what happens if the calf had eaten its whole life from a treifa, that's if his whole life had been eaten from a treifa, then go look in Siman Samach. In Siman Samach you'll see that the Ramah says that if an animal that ate treif, it's the last siman in Hilchos Treifus, and it's the last halachas have to do with, so to speak, with animals, what makes them kosher or treif, the last siman. And it says there that if an animal ate treif food, doesn't make a difference. The animal stays kosher. But if the animal his whole life ate treif food, then the animal's also. Okay? So the Shach says, look over there at that Ramah, and look what I said over there, because the Shach over there is not so comfortable with what the Ramah says. The Ramah says that if it ate Isser its whole life, it's also. The Shach says, Kenzain, it could be only if it ate Isuri Hana, not only if it ate Isuri Achila, which of course, that's not going to get to our Shiloh, because our Shiloh we're talking about Chametz, and Chametz is Asur Mana. But he says, the Shach by in Siman Pei Aleph says, go look in Siman Tzamach, where you see the Ramah talks about it, and I talked about it.
Where does it come from?
Where does it come from? So it comes from a Gemara in Tamura. The Gemara talks about, at the end of Tamura, talks about an animal that ate Isser and Heter, and the Gemara talks about whether it should be Zev a gorem or not, and whether if it ate all of its life, there's a Taisus and a Mordechai. We're not going to get into the gory details of that Shiloh, but exactly what the Shiloh is. But the long and short of what the Ramah is trying to say is, it's based on the Taisus right over there and others, that if an animal ate some Isser, then the milk that it produces, or the flesh of the animal, is made by Isser and by Heter, so Zev Zagarim is mutter. If its whole life it ate Isser, if its entire life was only Isser, then the flesh that you're eating, that's what I'm talking about here, or the milk that we're talking about, was produced by Isser. If you put in only Isser, then what comes out is going to be Isser also.
The Gemara talks about Avodah Zarah, if it's eating Avodah Zarah.
Yes, we're going to not talk about that. We're going to, in passing, mention those Gemaras. The same thing, it's the same thing that's related to that in this Gemara tomorrow, related to that Gemara Avodah Zarah. This Gemara, we're going to zip right past that. We're not going to say the Gemara. Past the din of Shulchan Aruch about that.
How about fish? What about fish? How do we know fish don't need to...
So we assume, the Mordechai, I'll mention, the Mordechai says, it can't be that if it eats Isser, it's also, he says, don't you know chickens eat bugs? Which is true. That's what chickens eat, lots of bugs. He says, so chickens are not us, and eggs are not us because they eat bugs, and that's because we say, well, sometimes it eats Isser, sometimes it eats Heter. The fish doesn't eat only Isser, it eats some Isser.
The fish, what it eats, it's not all snail.
Right, so if it only eats the Avon, when it's then it's Asur. That's what Ramah says. If you know an animal, you don't have to be Choshesh, the place comes in, you don't have to be Choshesh, but if you know an animal, that's all it eats is Isser.
So you tell me, nobody says any fish or fins and scales is mutter. Nobody says, well, this kind of fish.
So again, if you don't know, then you assume that it's mutter. If you knew specifically, then it would be. That's what Ramah says.
A guy called up and wanted to know if somebody said he was there at a fish farm, feeding the fish straight up. The fish called.
So as a good example, in a fish farm, where it's very controlled what they feed them, if all they feed them is this, then it would be this case of the Ramah. That would be true. We'll see in a second whether we follow that, but that's what we learn. No, but the Ramah says it's by even by Surah Chila. Right.
So then it's fish. So I never heard of it. Whoever heard of it, certain fish with fins and scales you can't eat because you have to find out what they fed them.
It's the Ramah says that. I'm not telling you that we're going to talk about whether that's the din or not. But that's what the Ramah says. Okay, Okay, so we're not going to talk about there's lots and lots of talking about rayas back and forth to this thing. I'm not really going to talk about that. But it is worth seeing. We're not going to talk about that either. If you have a lot of time, Rav Moshe has a very long tshuva about it. In Orach Chaim Chelik Aleph, it's a tshuva written when he was still in Europe. Sim Kuf Mem Zayin. He goes on for at least. You have read it? Okay. It's about 12 or 13 pages long. Okay, it's quite long. It's really something. And he says, you should know. He says, you should know. He says, you should know that I don't think that most of the Achronim really got to the Indian over here, so I'm going to tell you what I think. Okay, so now, you should know. So he says, he spends a long time trying to explain what the Ramah says over here. Okay, and he has a lot of kashrus on the Ramah. He has a lot of kashrus. And in the end, he's able to be miyashiv what the pshat in the Ramah is. Okay? He gives a pshat for what the Ramah means, what the shach could mean, but what the Ramah, he spends a lot of time explaining what the Ramah could mean. And he says, you should know that the Ramah that we have over here, the Ramah in Simon Samach is l'shitosei. Okay? He's l'shitosei with our Ramah. He says, our Ramah in Halacha Vav, that we had in Halacha Vav said, remember we had a shayla last time, is, what happens if you have, if the Kashrus yokem in a treifa, it drank milk from the mother who's a treifa, does the milk become mutter as soon as it swallows it, or does it only become mutter after it sits in the stomach for a while and starts to disintegrate and spoil? So the Ramah was machmir and said it becomes mutter only after it sits for a while in the stomach. So Ramesh says, it's within reason that this cow could be usher. Why? Because the milk that it swallowed the milk itself from the treifa was usher, let's call it for an hour. Okay, for an hour the milk was usher. So we could say that the calf has now taken nutrition from something that's usher. That's the Ramah L'Shitosei. But according to the Machaber, that said, that the milk is mutter as soon as the calf swallows it. He says, how could it possibly be that the calf should be usher, or the calf's milk should be usher? He says, the calf, the second it swallowed the milk, it was mutter. It didn't swallow isser, it only swallowed hector. So even if the Ramah, in theory, might be talking about a case where, even though in theory, if an animal would eat only isser, it would be usher. He says, but there's no such case, because according to the Machaber that we paskin, the Beisayis who paskin, that soul is mutter also, and the second the animal swallows it, it's mutter, so the animal didn't eat isurim, because the second it starts to swallow it, it's mutter. Okay, so Ramesh says, even though he's able to be miyasha the Ramah, he has a pshat for the Ramah. He said, but that's the Ramah Shitasa. He says the Machaber did not agree with that, and he brings a long list of other people who don't agree with what the Ramah says also. Okay, no, the Machaber doesn't say that in Simon Samach, but he says it's l'shitase from the halacha we had been learning that according to the Machaber that the minute the animal swallows it, what's in its stomach just becomes mutter. There's no shayla. I guess it could happen in a different case. I guess if it ate other yisroel, but it doesn't. Can't be. Okay, so he says he comes up with dachkim to be miyasha the Ramah, but in the end, long and short is that he says we don't pass like the Ramah. Okay, Ramesh says we don't follow the Ramah. He says even a Baal Nefesh doesn't have to be machmir for it. The Baal Nefesh part is two enough and later. But he says even a Baal Nefesh doesn't have to be machmir, and you can eat the milk. Don't worry about it. It's not a problem. Okay, that's what he says. Now, that's what Ramesh says. The Chayodam in the Nishmas part of the Chayodam in Hilchos Pesach talks about the Shiloh. So he says he has the Shiloh. What about eating milk from cows that ate chametz? So he has two reasons why he says it's not shaykh. Okay? It's not visibly possible that the cow ate chametz his whole life. And his first reason is because he says, well, the cow only eats chametz. The cow only eats chametz on Pesach. During the rest of the year, what the cow ate, even though it's things that would be forbidden as chametz, he says, but it's not isser. You're allowed to eat chametz the whole rest of the year. So if today, on whatever day today is, here in the middle of Adar, the cow ate chametz, he said that's relative to the cow, that's heter. He says, so the cow, there's no such thing. There might be an example of a case of a cow that ate isser its whole life. Maybe there's such a thing. Yossi's fish farm. They fed him only Isser his whole life. He said, but a cow can't possibly eat Chametz his whole life because Chametz is only Isser for 1 week out of the year. So the other 51 weeks of its nutrition was not Isser. Okay, now, not exactly sure what that means. I don't really understand. I mean, really, we say that Chametz is Isser all year round. I'm not exactly sure what he means. Really, Chametz, in Hilchos Kei, when we say it's Isur, I'm not really sure what he means, but that's what he says. He says it's possible you could have a case of the Ramah, not for milking, but he says, what if a kid had been born right before Pesach, and it was fed Chametz its whole life, mamish its whole life, and you shechted it on the last day Pesach, then you could have a cow that ate Isser, but it wouldn't be, of course, giving milk. Cows don't give milk until they give birth. So it wouldn't be giving milk. He says, but milk, it's not shaykh for a cow to say that you have a cow that ate Isser his whole life, and then it gave milk. It's not, physically it's not possible. He said, that's arguing that the Ramah doesn't apply to Chametz. But then he argues further, and he says, even the whole thing is not shaykh. Why? He says, because, every time you have a cow that gives milk, there are two things that contribute to the cow giving milk. It's the things that it ate, and its body, and the animal itself. There are two parts, and each one can't do it by itself. If you have an animal and you don't feed it, it's not going to give any milk. If you have a big pile of hay and you don't give it to a cow, it's not going to give milk either. He says you need you need two things together. You need a cow and you need feed if you want to get milk out of it. The machine doesn't work, one part by itself. He says so. It's always a zev zagar. Okay, now, how that fits with the Ramah, I have no idea. The Ramah in Simon Samach is talking about eating the flesh itself, so maybe it's a little better. But he's saying essentially by milk, it's not possible to say, there's never an example of a cow that said the milk came completely from Isser. Because it can't come from Isser, because there's always the cow part of it. We could maybe think of one case. There's one case that it could be, which would be is the case actually, which is the Gemara Tumor is talking about, which is Kshera, a baby calf that was born from a treifa. That is to say, you shechted the mother and you found out that the mother had a treifa that's been around for 10 years. It had an extra piece. Okay, something else that had an extra hand, an extra finger. So it was a treifa its whole life. So the baby itself is a treifa, was born, the flesh itself was born from a mother who was a treifa. It nursed from its own mother who was a treifa. So everything from beginning to end of this whole animal is maybe a treifa. No, maybe. Anyhow, so the Chayadim says that the cases are not negated to Chametz. Okay, we're going to get that. There's more to the Chayadim coming in a second. But from this part, he says it's not trying to have a behemoth that was Kol Yomel that ate Chametz. Okay, first of all, because it's never Kol Yomel because it eats non-Isser all year round, and it's not Chametz because the animal's flesh, so to speak, plays a role in creating the milk. So he's not good. And Ramosha says it doesn't make a difference. We don't pass it to Ramah. Okay, the whole thing is not true. Basically, we don't pass it to Ramah, and there's no problem. Okay, so these person that concern that maybe Shlosh Ramah, these two of the more contemporary person, sort of, both said you shouldn't be machmir for that part. Okay, now, but the Chayadim says if you want to know what the shayla is, I'll tell you what the real shayla is. Okay, I'll tell you what the real shayla is as to whether it should be mutter or not. It says like this. Now, I wasn't clear how to read the first bunch of words there. He says, I didn't see any of the Rishonim or Achronim talking about this shayla. The shayla was, could you drink the milk from these cows? I didn't see it. I don't know what he meant was, I didn't see anybody talking about it as in, it's so posh. I mean, if nobody talked about it, it must be mutter kind of a thing. Like, in other words, where's everybody been? If it would be us or someone would have said this. Or I didn't see it took like in more Moshe style, which was, I don't think that they really got to the heart of the Inyan. I wasn't sure what he meant when he said, because there are plenty of Achronim who talked about it. The Chametz has all pages of who people talked about it. There's Prima Godim's right on the page who talk about it, and in your day who talks about it. There's a Tshuva in the Avnei Milum who talks about it, two Tshuvas in the Avnei Milum who talk about it. Anyway, so that's what he says. So he says like this. He says, to be choishish, that the animal ate kol yamehah, that it ate yisurin, he ate chametz, it's not possible. But the shayla is like this. He says, if you look at the Magen Avram in Hilchos Pesach, Taf, Mem, Hey, it's a cut in Hey. The Magen Avram says, the appearance of what the Magen Avram says is that the din of Zev Zagarim doesn't apply to things that happen on Pesach. Why? Because Zev Zagarim, the heter of Zev Zagarim is a form of bittul. It's saying it was caused by Isser and by heter simultaneously. Well, that's a form of bittul. Bittul doesn't work on Pesach. Chametz is also b'mashu. It can't be bittul. Okay? And what it comes from is... comes from a Ran. Okay, this is a Ran. The Ran's explaining how does Zev Zagarim work. He has a kasha. It's not important what is kasha. That's why I put the dots there. It's not a kasha. he says, you might think, he asks a question about that Zev Zagarm, and he says, no, any question, the Dav Achasi, Bintel, and Zev Zagarm are the same thing. Zev Zagarm mutter matam, fishing is batal, is heter. There's a little bit of heter causing this, a little bit of isser causing this thing. So if the two things together are causing it. So the isser is batal into the heter. And of course, it doesn't mean batal b'shishim, it means batal b'roiv. So if there was a certain amount of isser, a certain amount of heter, the isser shabai is batal in for its contribution, and therefore that's why it works, because it's a form of bittul. Okay, it works as a form of bittul. Zaran avodah zarah. It's a form of bittul. So the Magen Avraham is therefore saying since it's a form of bittul, Chametz on Pesach is also b'mashu. Chametz on Pesach cannot be batal. So Zev Zakarm doesn't work either. Okay, that's what the Magen Avraham says. Okay, now the Chayadim brings. He says this would be the only tzad to be machmir because this is Magen Avraham. He says, but you should know. Everyone's misreading the Magen Avraham. But this over here on the screen here, it's not a Magen Avraham. This is the Ran in Avodah Zarah. Not talking about Pesach or anything. He's talking about Avodah Zarah. But the Chayadim says that it's a misreading of the Magen Avraham, and really the Magen Avraham does not say what you think he says. Really, the Magen Avraham only answers Zev Zagar in a very specific case, which is not important to us, a Shvach Eitzim Bepas, where the actual Isser stays intact while it's transferring into the Heter. Okay, what goes on is, if you have coals made out of old bread, so you have the chametz is right there being putting its shvach of the eitzim, what we're calling the eitzim, into the pas. That's the case where it doesn't work on Pesach. But if it's a traditional zev zagar, then it would work. And he brings two rayas. One raya we're not going to talk about is what Rabbi Risa mentioned before him. The Gemara's in Avodah Zarah talking about. The Gemara's in Avodah Zarah talk about that zev zagar should work by Avodah Zarah. Okay, well, Avodah Zarah is also asur b'mashu. And yet the Gemara talks about Zev Zagar working for Avodah Zarah. He's like, so what's going on? It's important Sim Kuf Mem Beis in Yerdeh. All kinds of dinim about when Zev Zagar works for Avodah Zarah. He's like, what are you talking about? It's asur b'mashu. If it's asur b'mashu, there's no Zev Zagar. He says, go look in Kuf Mem Beis, and you're going to see that there are all kinds of cases where it works. It's based in Gemaras. He says, so don't tell me that you can't say Zev Zagar for something that's asur b'mashu. It's not true like that. And he says, if you look at the Magen Avraham himself in Siman Tafnan Beis, it's Sivkot Tez, he says, the Magen Avraham says, if you make a cheese, I think he's talking about a soft cheese, he says, make a cheese with chametz. Chametz means vinegar made of chametz. Okay, the play of words here. Chametz, shal chametz. Okay, it's vinegar made of chametz, as it traditionally was. Vinegar and of heter. So you together made I'm guessing a soft cheese out of it. You put a little chametz vinegar and a little, I don't know, lemon juice into it. Okay, and you made your cheese out of it. So the Magen Avraham says it's mutter because it's Zev Zagarim. So he says, no. He says, what happened? I thought you told me that Zev Zagarim doesn't work on Pesach. He says, obviously I'm right that the Magen Avraham never said that Zev Zagarim doesn't work on Pesach. All he means is that a very specific kind of Zev Zagarim, of Shvach Eitzim B'pas, a special kind of Zev Zagarim, that's what doesn't work, but all other Zev Zagarims work. Okay. Before I explain that cheetah, let me just, I didn't explain to you how that works. The Ran says that. So what is it going to work? I'll just mention to you, the Behetiv, right on that Magen Avraham, the one in Kufman and Tafnan Beis, says, he says, there are people who think that the Magen Avraham is talking about that you make this cheese on Pesach. He says, I don't know why they think that. He says, I don't know what the basis is for saying that. He's not talking about this part of the Magen Avraham. He says, but the Chayadim is assuming, that the chametz was made, that the cheese was made on Pesach. Doesn't say that in the Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham may very well be talking about that they made the cheese before Pesach, when Zev Zagarim, of course, does work. Okay, the Magen Avraham in Tafnan Beis doesn't say he means before Pesach. Pretty well understands that he means on Pesach. He actually does. And the others, there's a lot of people talking about this Magen Avraham, whether he means that. But I'm just mentioning the Behetiv says it's not so clear. And there's a tshuva in the Kashrus Achron, in Shulchan Harav, also talks about the Magen Avraham and how you can answer the Kashrus from Yerdeh. The questions from Avodah Zarah. I mentioned that in the movement, everybody talks about this Magen Avraham. What's pshat in it? How could he say that chametz is asur b'mashu and therefore there's no Zev Zakarim when the Gemara says that by Avodah Zarah, which is also asur b'mashu, which should not work. Okay, there's a lot of people, we're not going to talk about this. Okay, anyhow. So what does it mean? So how could it work? How could Zev Zagarim work on Pesach? How is it shaykh that it could work on Pesach when on Pesach chametz is asur b'mashu? What's wrong with what we said beforehand? Chametz should be mashu. Okay, so a number of Achronim say that what it means is they understand that either they understand this to be what the Ran means, not so easy, or they understand that others who argue on the Ran learn that Zev Zagarim doesn't work through bittul. Okay, what it works is that the two things that cause it, in our case, the animal ate chametz and non-chametz. Okay, when it ate two different things, those things in din are considered to be non-chametz, because when we have a mixture, when we have two things together, we look at what the main part of it is, and therefore the heter is causing the milk to come here. It's sort of like as if the chametz is non-existent. It's not that it's bottled. It's like it doesn't exist at all, because before it even came to the cow, it was diluted in the other thing. Ramesh says, if it would be true that this would be considered to be, that milk is considered to be having hana from the food it came from, he says, it would be also, there would be no heter zev zagar. He says, zev zagar means that the isser doesn't exist. He says, wait a second, but if my animal ate a little of this and a little of that, I did get hana from the isser. If you think that the milk is considered to be have hana from the thing it came from, then you did get hana from the isser because I have more milk. If I wouldn't have eaten the isser, I would have had less milk. So I am considered getting hana. So he says, elamai, he says, that's why it's called zev gorem. He says, because these things are not considered to be having hana from the isser. It's only a gorem from the isser. These are indirect connections. They're too distant, the food to the milk are too separate from each other to be considered that they're one and the same. And you're not having hana from the isser. No, you're not having hana from the isser. You're having a gorem for the isser. In things that are being gorem, then we don't have to worry about bittul. That's not called bittul. We're not being mavatal things into that. We're saying it's not gorem. The gorem is a group of heter. Okay. Now,
it is gorem. If it's not hana, then
what's wrong? So Ramesh really holds it's not hana at all. He holds it's not hana at all. He says, but if it would be, and he holds even if it would be 100% coming from Isser, it would be mutter. He's arguing the Ramah. But he said that even the Ramah, even the ones who want to say that maybe if it ate only Isser, it would cause it, he said, that's not called having hana from the thing. It might be, it was in the spot makayim of Isser, and that might make it Isser, but Isser achila. But the fact that it's Isser hana doesn't play a role over here. If Isser, but that just shows us that it's not, there's a very tenuous connection between the Isser and the milk that's coming from it. Okay. Okay, so there's a Bir Halacha about this in Taf Mem Hey. Bir Halacha talks on this Magen Avraham. Bir Halacha brings a shayla lechorim whether we pass like this, like the simple reading of this Magen Avraham. Is there a gorem bottle on Pesach or is it not bottle on Pesach? The Magen Avraham, again, the simple reading of the Magen Avraham is that he's saying that it does not work on Pesach, and many others disagree with that. And the Bir Halacha says that the din is you should follow what the Gra says. That the Gra says that you should be machmir l'chatchila and not be samech on zev zagorim if it happens on Pesach. You should not allow it on Pesach. If you're really stuck, he has a bunch of examples of extenuating circumstances, then you could be mekel. But the Gra says to be machmir l'chatchila, not like be machmir l'chatchila like the Magen Avraham and Tafnim Hey seems to say that zev zagorim is not mutter. Now, if that would be true, if we stopped right here, we would say, well, if a cow ate any chametz on Pesach, it would be usher, because there's no heter of zev zagorim. We're saying it only the heter of zev zagorim. The whole possibility here. We're not saying it's because it's not makolia they'll be chametz, but at least it has to work with zev zagorim, and zev zagorim doesn't work on Pesach.
It has provided it ate chametz on Pesach.
So we're getting there.
Yeah, that milk.
I'm getting there. Yes, I'm getting it. Correct. That's what we're talking about so far. You ate the milk, right? You ate it on Pesach, and you got the milk on Pesach. But you should know, as relates to milk. No. Zev zagorim only not on Pesach. If you
happen on Pesach,
it would be much different. So but as all we're talking about so far, the Bir Halacha is talking about whether you should machmir for zev zagorim. That Bir Halacha is not talking about eating milk. He's just talking in general about zev zagorim. Like you make cheese, like the Magen Avraham example, you make cheese out of it, something like that. When it comes to making milk, there are other stagum lahaka, like I told you. Ramesh himself says there's no connection between the food and the milk that comes out of it. He says they're not connected to each other. So there are other stagum lahaka. So when you turn to the Mishnah Berurah in Taf Mem Ches, where he talks about can you eat milk from cows that ate chametz, there he talks about the child specifically. He doesn't connect it to zev zagorim. Just it's a short couple of lines. He brings 2 days. He brings a Pri Megadim says you should wait 24 hours after the cow ate chametz. By that point, it will have been digested and fully, passed through the whole system of the cow. That seems to be saying that zev zagorim would be usher. Zev zagorim would not be both on Pesach, but once it passed through the whole system, somehow at that point, the isra is passed.
What's the case? There's no on Pesach?
Mm-hmm.
Before,
all right, on Pesach. We'll talk about what happens on Pesach in a second. Before Pesach in a second. And he brings Yeshus Yaakov, who says that as long as the animal eats some isser, eating some non-chametz, it's good enough. And as long as it's eating a little bit here and there, it's continuously eating non-chametz, that's good enough. That implies that zev zegarim is not, we don't care about zev zegarim. If it's eating some heter, it means it's eating some chametz and some heter, it seems to not care about. Okay. So that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. Now, I'm almost done. Okay. So all of this we're talking about is in so to speak, in theory about cows who eat chametz. L'maisa, I went to look around to see from different farmer websites as to what animals eat. What do dairy cows eat? What do they feed them? And if you read through, we have one guy from the Midwest, from England, Australia, and Ontario around. It's got a full world view over here. And everyone says, Pachas that they eat lots of things that are not chametz, hay and protein and corn and turnips, and all kinds of interesting things. But all of them also mention that they potentially eat a certain amount of grains. Okay, everyone mentions that they eat a certain amount of grains. This whole shaila is working with a certain assumption. Okay, you have to just pause for a second, which is that grain, wheat, even if the word grain means wheat is not chametz. Okay, wheat is only chametz when it gets wet. Right. So it becomes chametz. Now the din says in Shulchan Aruch, when the cow licks the grain, that saliva can cause it to become chametz, but that only the case in Shulchan Aruch is where the grain then falls back onto the floor. If the animal swallows the grain, that's not a problem. I mean, it's not becoming chametz in his stomach. So it's possible that it can become chametz. I'm not saying that it can't become chametz, or maybe it got wet beforehand. It could be, but it could be that it gets wet. And it's not usual that we get wet, but it could be it got wet. But I'm saying is that we're working with an assumption that the cow eats some chametz. It appears that they feed cows a certain amount of chametz, and that feed would become chametz. That's not muchach that it will become chametz, but it could. Okay, now, after all what I told you so far, from Pei Al Halacha Vav, about why it should maybe, and from Simon Tzam, why it should maybe be mutar aser, comes along Arugas Abaysim, okay, who at the end of his tshuva, I thought it was interesting, at the end of his tshuva he says, the tshuva is not short, it's maybe a page or two long. At the end of the tshuva he says, but you should just know, I'm sorry that I can't answer you properly. This is after he gave a nice long answer. But quoting reciting all along, I can't give you a good answer thoroughly because you should just know that the women kicked me out of my room where my svarim are because they cleaned for Pesach. So I'm sorry, I can't answer your silent forward. And it's not that you should not think that he missed out on anything. I mean, he on pages, 2 pages long. It was nice and plenty to say, but he says they kicked me out of my room. I can't really see what's said. Anyhow, so he says, I think you can't eat the milk for a different reason. He says there's a different reason. He doesn't talk about most of the shaila. He talks about it comes from a completely different angle. He says, you guys did it, that you only think so far the shaila like this because you only got to tell Halacha. He said, but you look at Halacha Zayin, you're going to find out, which we didn't get to yet, that's why we're right here in the middle, and you come to Halacha Zayin, you're going to find out there's a din like this. If a baby needs to nurse, a baby needs to nurse, you shouldn't give him to nurse from someone who's not Jewish, or you shouldn't give him to nurse from a lady who is Jewish, who because of sakana had to eat isser, and she was allowed to eat isser because it was the sakana. You're not allowed to give him to nurse because the trade food that the person ate, either the not Jewish lady or the Jewish lady who was allowed to eat it, that trade food has an effect on the child because it has an effect on the milk that the mother produces, passes through to the baby, but has an effect on the baby long term, not tomorrow, but long term on his ruchnius, it has an effect on him. He says, so we're all talking about, he says, the halacha. The din is, it might be mutter. The din is, of course, the baby could nurse from a not Jewish lady or from his mother who ate isser. Of course, in din you're allowed to. But from the hashkafa, from the pesha aser, from the side of the what will affect his neshama, he says, that applies anyhow. I don't care. Don't give me rules and zevzek. He says, come on, the lady, the shiksa doesn't only eat chametz, or the Jewish lady doesn't only eat isser for her whole life. She had to have one thing. She had to eat one pill that was aser. But the rest, it's zevzek garim. It's for sure mutter. And for sure, we don't think that it's
the buyer to produce it too.
And the buyer to produce it, it's not aser min hadin, but there's some kind of an extra isser, or whatever we want to call it, that you're not supposed to do such a thing. He says, and therefore, you shouldn't eat the chametz from the cows that eat.
Cows, though.
What's the difference? He says, what's the difference? He says, he brings Raya said. And he says, he brings another thing. I thought you had a different question.
No.
The shaila is there's no tintamale for the baby. It's that the isser passes through to the milk and causes tintamale in the baby.
I know, that's my baby.
Right. No, the milk carries with it some traces of what it came with. Okay, so now he says you should just know. I think you asked a different question, which is the question he asked, which is how do I know that it applies to isurim that are time dependent? Okay, chametz is the time that is. Maybe the halacha zayin is talking about that they eat treif, like a pig is treif. So the pig has an effect on the person, but maybe eating something that's only time dependent, like an isur, like chametz is time. There's nothing inherently bad about chametz. It's just that there's something bad eating on a certain week. He says, but there's an obvious right. There's an obvious right because the whole din of halacha zayin comes from the case of Acher, whose mother ate on Yom Kippur. Okay, the Gemara talks about the Acher was affected by the fact that his mother ate on Yom Kippur. Eating on Yom Kippur is also a time-dependent isser. It's not an isser. It's not permanent. There's nothing wrong with eating potatoes. It's that potatoes on Yom Kippur are also. The same thing as eating chametz. Chametz is even more so. Chametz is actually the food itself has something wrong to it, but it's a time-dependent isser, and there's nothing wrong. That doesn't make a difference. That also affects the child. Okay, so now I told you in din there were all kinds of shaylos whether it's mutter to eat it, and now here from I don't know what you want to call it, a pesach angle, there might be reason to eat it, but in practice the whole shayla is moved. Okay, and that goes like this. Or so it seems. A number of the poskim mention that the milk is only usher, what Yossi mentioned before, if the cow ate the chametz on Pesach and produced the milk on Pesach. What's the reason? Seemingly what the reason is, they don't say this, but seemingly the reason is, the whole tzad ta'asr, the main tzad ta'asr of the food is because there's no zev gorem, because zev gorem doesn't work on Pesach. Well, those kind of dinim only apply on Pesach. Okay? Chametz only usher b'mashu on Pesach. If today, or a month before Pesach, chametz falls into food, it's bottle. It's only on Pesach chametz usher b'mashu. So if a cow produced milk on Erev Pesach, and it had been fed chametz, I don't care. So zev gorem, and it's mutter. Okay? It's only if the cow did it on Pesach. So that's one piece of information. Now the next thing is that from a other kashrus perspective, we tell people only to buy milk that either has hashgacha for Pesach or that it was milk from before Pesach. Okay, the reason why we tell them that, the reason why we tell them to buy milk that was made before Pesach is because there are tiny amounts of vitamins that are put in. There are kalim that the milk is made of. All of those are not serious shilas because there's only tiny amounts of blias. But those shilas were they happen on Pesach. If on Pesach someone put in a vitamin that was bottled in a trillion times, it wouldn't be bottled because it would be asur b'mashu. If it was made on kalim that had in it an einer ben yamim blia from chametz, it would be asur b'mashu. So we tell people, buy your milk either with hashgacha for Pesach or milk that was made before Pesach. This way you don't have these asur b'mashu shilas. If you buy your milk, if the milk cow is milked on Pesach, and you buy that milk on Pesach, you're running into potential mashu shilas that stay away from that. Avoid those shilas. Buy your milk before Pesach, or buy milk that was bottled before Pesach. So, now, last piece of information you need to know is that hashgachas, for all these same reasons, don't give hashgacha on milk made on Pesach. We tell people either buy milk made from before Pesach or milk with hashgacha. Well, those are the same thing. Nobody gives hashgacha on milk or cheese on Pesach, and the reason is for the same reasons. They don't want to have shilas of isur mashu. They don't want to have problems because you can't kasher kalim on Pesach. You're not allowed to go on Pesach. So how are they going to kasher the equipment in order to do the milking? How? And they're going to be worried about all kinds of, oh my gosh, if I have to be worried about mashus of making food on Pesach, so there's no such thing as Pesach food being made on Pesach.
Well, after Pesach will be mutter to drink that milk.
Yes, it'll be mutter. So nobody gets, so what we say like this, you have to buy milk that has hashgacha or that was made before Pesach. Nobody gives hashgacha on milk that's actually made on Pesach, partially because these reasons they don't worry about the feed and they don't worry about the mashu. So in practice, the milk that you're going to buy is not going to have the shayla of maybe the chametz, the cow that chametz, because if you're following, so to speak, the rules, then you won't have a problem. Yes.
Yeah, so sometimes you see different kashrus agencies say, as long as you buy chalav yisrael milk, you're going to be okay. But really, we should tell people, if they don't keep chalav yisrael, for example, it's as long as you buy milk with hashgacha, you're okay.
If you buy, no, hashgacha for Pesach.
With hashgacha for Pesach.
Hashgacha for Pesach. Right, yeah, well, chalav yisrael has the same thing. Nobody makes chalav yisrael milk on Chol Moed. Nobody makes it on Chol Moed.
Wait. Now you're clarifying. You're saying not that it's only hashgacha for Pesach. It has to be a hashgacha with a P in it. You're saying that the OU or other kashrus agencies will give a hashgacha without the P.
Sure.
Even if it's manufactured on Pesach.
Sure they do. Yes, they do because...
So you don't mean it has a...
I'm sorry. I meant hashgacha for Pesach. Yes, I meant hashgacha for Pesach. I'm sorry. I should have been clear about it. Yes, milk with hashgacha is being made every day of the week because that's nothing, right? I mean hashgacha for Pesach. It's moot because we tell people only buy milk that has hashgacha for Pesach or that was bottled before Pesach. I'm sorry. I meant to say hashgacha for Pesach, right? And chol v'yisrael is also not being chol moed. So all those things, if you buy chol v'yisrael, you're also okay. If you buy milk that has hashgacha for Pesach, you're okay. And if you buy milk that was milk before Pesach, it's okay. And all of which we would tell people to do anyhow. So in practice, the person the consumer's not going to end up with a shiloh, except if he buys eggs. I tend to be a shiloh about eggs, because eggs, we recommend people to buy before Pesach also, that's true. There are tiny shilohs that there could be to it, the way they wash them and they clean them and they put things on the outside. We tell people it's preferable to buy eggs before Pesach, but in theory, a person could go buy a dozen eggs on Pesach, and with them on Pesach, from that chicken that had eaten chametz in its feet. I didn't put it up on the screen here, but I have some details of what chickens eat. They eat chametz also, a little chametz also. So the chicken could have eaten a little chametz. Eggs come to market pretty quickly. You know, if the chicken laid an egg on the first day of Pesach, that egg's going to be in the store on Chol Hamoed. So that egg, it doesn't have a shkacha for Pesach. So if you bought your egg before Pesach, you've completely avoided the shiloh. Okay, or if you bought egg that was kosher for Pesach, I don't know if such a thing. Eggs with a hashkacha for Pesach, I guess, in a new angle, you know. Well, you know, Reb Fishbein found this tape with a hashkacha for Pesach, you know. So, masking tape, you know. But anyhow, so you never know. But if you buy your eggs on Chol Hamoed, eggs that were laid on Pesach, then you're running into this potential shiloh, which is that egg has been in the store just for day 2. I mean, it was just laid on Pesach. Ken Zayin came from a chicken that ate chametz, which would then bring you to this shiloh we talked about of maybe it has an effect because of the Yisamash.